Word of mouth.
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 Well, definitely.
Mouth.
This is Word of Mouth from NHPR. I'm Virginia Prescott. Gloria Norris grew up in Manchester, New Hampshire's public housing projects. Jimmy, her abrasive, abusive father, made it clear to his two daughters that he would have preferred a son. Her mother, Shirley, smoked and drank highballs and tried not to make her husband angry. Typical dysfunctional stuff. Until December of 1963, when a brutal double homicide rocked the city of Manchester and the Norris family. In the early morning hours of Friday the 13th, local businessman Hank Piasny stabbed his ex-wife Doris and a companion to death in her home. Gloria was a child at the time, but her father was friends and hunting partners with the accused murderer, and Gloria idolized his daughter Susan, who would later commit a horrific crime of her own. It is little wonder that Gloria Norris went on from this twisted drama to become a screenwriter and independent film producer who's worked with directors Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma, and Woody Allen, among others. Gloria's new memoir, Kookooland, is part true crime, part coming-of-age story, and many parts crazy town, and is written from the perspective of her 9-year-old self. Gloria Norris joins us now from Los Angeles. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Virginia.
Well, you were just 9 years old when your father's friend, Hank, murdered his ex-wife, Doris, and a man who was with her at the time in 1963. How did you find out?
Well, I found out when I woke up in the morning. It was still kind of dark out, and I heard, someone saying, "Oh, no, oh, no." And it was my parents who were hearing it on the radio for the first time. And it was, all hell broke loose, chaos in the home. And at first I was afraid that maybe something had happened to Susan, who I idolized, and I, thought it would be terrible if something had happened to her. And then I found out that it was her mother and another man. And yeah, that was the beginning of this whole saga of hearing about the murders and the aftermath of it and what happened to Hank.
So you remember those little details on the radio, but I would just love to hear more about the murder and also get a sense of your voice in this book. So give us first an idea of what actually did happen on this fateful night.
What happened on this fateful night was Doris Piasny, who at this point is divorced from Hank Piasny. She has made the choice that she was going to leave this abusive husband, and she divorced him after many calls to the police that never went anywhere, and she is now a free woman. She's thinking she's going to move out to California, and so she goes out on the town in Manchester to a club, and she meets up with some friends there, and she meets up with this man, John Bentley, who was, I guess people said he was a playboy around town. He was single, and he was very dashing. He was a war hero, and she invited him and a couple of other couples back to the house, and they were there having a good time, and the other couples left, and Doris was left alone with John Bentley, and little did they know that Hank was lying in wait, and he, came down and murdered them both.
So in the book, you and your dad are sort of talking about what happened. If you could read that bit for us.
Maybe John Bentley wasn't looking for trouble that night, but trouble found him anyway. I wondered if he hadn't stood up to Hank, whether he might still be alive. But any guy who had defended his country against an army of bullies sure as hell wasn't going to walk away from just one who was shorter than him and who probably seemed like somebody he could take. But unfortunately for John, Hank was good and mad. And from what I could tell, when somebody was good and mad, it made them big and strong. Jimmy thought Hank had every reason to be good and mad. In the old country, if a wife cheated on her husband and ruined his good name, she disappeared, he said to me the night after the murders. She fell off a goddamn cliff or something, and nobody asked any goddamn questions. That's the way it's been for thousands of years. A man's wife embarrasses him, she pays the price. Sayonara, baby. But Doris wasn't Hank's wife anymore, I pointed out, since they had gotten divorced. Don't be an idiot, Jimmy replied. Hank's a goddamn Catholic, even if he never went to church. To Catholics, divorce is a goddamn sin. Once you marry somebody, even if she's a whore like Doris, you're stuck with her. That stupid church and Hank's old lady drummed that into his squash ever since he was a pipsqueak. So if you ask me, it's their goddamn fault he carved up Doris and her big shot boyfriend. Maybe they ought to lock up his mother and the goddamn Pope.
Gloria Norris reading from her memoir, Kookooland, and it is just astounding. I mean, this voice of this father talking to you, a 9-year-old kid, remembering a terrible crime and the shockwaves that sent through your community and your family. So why did you make that decision to tell the story from this perspective of this 9-year-old or your childhood self?
It seemed to evolve very naturally to do it that way. At first, I had thought about doing it more journalistically, and I tried that, but I wasn't getting the truth of what I was trying to get at. And obviously, coming from being a screenwriter, I was used to writing dialogue, and that felt natural and more visceral to me. I thought that I would be able to really bring the reader into the story much more effectively that way. And once I made that decision, it was smooth sailing. I just felt very much in the skin of that 9-year-old self.
Well, you definitely bring Jimmy into the story in a very, very clear way. He's telling you his version of things, she deserved this. How many of the real details of that murder were you aware of as a child?
I was aware of lots of the details because, as I said, it was, big news in the house, and it was all my father wanted to talk about, and he never censored himself with me the way parents do and should with their kids. You don't say everything to a kid. He was not like that. I was his sidekick. I was treated the same as any guy, and so he told me a lot of the details of the crime. Some of them were rumors at the time. They were quite graphic. They were sexual, and he made no bones about, telling me that.
So what happened to Hank, his friend?
He had a lot of close friends in the community, and he, judges and cops and everybody knew him because they all bought their guns at his store. And he also had some money. He was able to hire an excellent attorney, and they found him, not guilty by reason of insanity. And he spent just a little over 2 years at the state hospital in Concord. And then he was found to be sane again and let out with no probation or anything like that.
I'm speaking with Gloria Norris. She's a screenwriter, independent film producer, and her new memoir is called Kookooland. It's about growing up in the projects in Manchester, New Hampshire, where her family is very close to another family that's deeply affected by a double murder. And actually, another murder. The violence does not end. Now, you idolized Hank's daughter, Susan. How did she cope with the death of her mother?
Well, initially she had a breakdown. At the time that the murders happened, she was at the absolute pinnacle of her success as a young woman. She was on her way to medical school, very rare for a woman at that time. She was the editor-in-chief of her college newspaper. She had a poem that was going to be published nationally. And when the murders happened, she fell apart. She ended up, in McLean's hospital. She was, devastated by it. But she did manage to, get some treatment, regroup, and go back to school, graduate. She did go to medical school. So she made these efforts to continue on the path that she had been on, but she was not able to sustain it. And so she would get physically ill and have to drop out of school, and she never actually graduated from medical school at University of Vermont. She almost did, but didn't make it.
And there's more of a twist in her story as well that comes up later that I will leave to the reader. But, this is the central murder here, the Piasny murder. 50 years after this crime, people did not want to talk with you about it. Is that true as you were researching it?
Yes, it was very true. I was stonewalled every step of the way, from the criminal justice system to the local librarian. The people who remembered this murder, it was seen as a black spot, I guess, on the city, and people just simply did not want to talk about it. And certainly Susan's relatives did not want to speak about it, and she was very much blackballed from the family. She really had no contact with a single family member right through the end of her life. So it really had strong resonance. It echoed for a long time.
And you were trying to do all of this research while living in California, the place that your father called Kookooland. Tell us a little bit about the title of your book.
Yes, the title comes from the fact that my father thought that everybody who lived in California was, surfing ding-dong, as he would call it. And that was one of his many colorful ways of describing California. He thought the people were liberals or they were, lunatics. And I think, he's not the only one that thinks that about the California people. And so, but obviously the irony of the title is that the Kookooland was back in my home. And I have found a lot of people really relate to this title when they see it. Everybody has their own Kookooland, Families all have their craziness, not as extreme perhaps as this, but, everybody knows what Kookooland is.
Well, it is extreme, and it does make sense to me that you might pursue a cinematic career after this childhood with poverty and addiction and violence. In the process of writing this, did your relationship with Jimmy, your time living in the projects, did it take on different meaning for you?
Well, it was a very colorful childhood, Virginia. The dark side of it is very dark, but the book is very funny too. I mean, he was a very colorful character, and so I think it was yes, as you say, a perfect childhood for going into telling stories and making movies. We all love a true crime story. We love criminals, and he was a criminal. So and he also was a big movie lover. So I really believe that I would not have ended up in the film business if Jimmy hadn't been my father, because he loved movies, all kinds of movies, foreign films, took me to Boston to see Charlie Chaplin movies. And so he gave me a really great film education in amongst the, how to, sell a stolen television. I learned some other things.
Well, in addition to these revelations about your dad, I mean, as you're saying, there was so much to him that was just compelling and interesting and charming in its way, but also so hard. And I wonder about your mother. Now, at one point, you write that she wouldn't have left him because she was afraid that he would have killed her. I mean, what a thing to live under. Did writing about this, your childhood, change your vision of your mother at all?
This book is really a love letter to her. She made an incredibly difficult choice. I really and truly believe that had she tried to leave him the way Doris left Hank, that she would have ended up dead. He, on many occasions, did really threaten her. When I came home from college, there were bullet holes in the ceiling where he had shot a gun at her. So she did not want me to have to go through what Susan went through of losing a mother and having my life destroyed that way. So she stuck it out. There was no good choice. we like to think there is a good choice, but sometimes there isn't. And for her, the lesser of two evils was to stick it out. And, she did have some fun times, she would say herself. She liked going to the racetrack with him and some other things like that. But on balance, she did live a life of fear. She was in fear a lot of time. And she made that sacrifice to, have her to the end of her life. And so as I dedicate the book to her, she is really a person that I always knew loved me. And I think that's what really saved me.
Well, Gloria, thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
Thank you very much, Virginia. I've enjoyed this.
Gloria Norris, she's a screenwriter, independent film producer, and now an author of the memoir called Kookooland. And we've got a link to much more in the book. It's at our website, wordofmouthradio.org.